To convert your ribbon air fork to coil, you'll need the following tools, parts, and supplies. All of the spring conversion parts, an HG spline cassette tool, calipers or a ruler, an 11mm socket, 3 and 1mm hex keys, a 10mm wrench, a 15 and 26mm wrench or appropriate adjustable wrenches, snap ring pliers, a rubber mallet, and a dowel or plastic pipe roughly 450mm in length. You'll also need 30 cc's of 5 to 10 weight fork oil, slick honey grease, and general purpose grease. We recommend that of the thick marine variety. After removing the fork from the bicycle, turn the ramp knob to its lightest setting. This will ensure that all air is released during the deflation process. Remove the dust covers from both the top and bottom Schrader valves. Release all air pressure from the air spring by depressing the valves. Begin with the negative valve first. With the air released, take a 10mm wrench and unthread the Schrader valve located at the bottom of the disc leg. Unthread it until it protrudes roughly 5mm. Thread the Schrader cap back onto the valve and use your rubber mallet to tap the Schrader cap and release the air spring rod from the lowers. Once released, continue to unthread the Schrader valve from the bottom of the fork. Turn the rebound knob to the full slow position before removing the knob. Remove the knob with your 1.5mm hex and set it aside. Use a 10mm open-end wrench and unthread the screw assembly. The rebound needle will unthread to the end of the damper rod as the damper screw unthreads. Feel for the threads of the damper screw to release from the rod, and then pull up on the damper screw straight out of the rebound needle. Thread the Schrader cap back onto the valve and partially thread the valve into the damper rod and tap on it firmly with the mallet to unseat the damper rod. Slide the casting off the stanchion assembly and set it aside. Lubrication oil may drip from the casting and stanchions, but oil loss can be reduced if the casting is left horizontal. After checking again that all pressure has been released from the air chamber, use snap ring pliers to remove the snap ring at the bottom of the air spring stanchion. Thread the Schrader valve into the end of the spring side rod. While gripping the screw, pull firmly on the rod to remove the spring assembly and set it aside. To remove the ramp control assembly from your fork, first take an 11mm socket and unthread the lock nut on the Schrader valve while holding the orange ramp control knob. Once completed, lift the orange knob off the cap and set it aside. With your HG spline cassette tool, fully unthread the top cap. With your long dowel or plastic pipe, pop the ramp control piston assembly out through the bottom. Take the ribbon coil spring preload cap assembly and thread it into the top of the crown about halfway or 3 to 4 threads. Very lightly grease the coil spring and insert the spring through the bottom of the stanchion. First, unthread the lock nut from the top of the spring rod with a 15mm wrench on the lock nut and a 26mm wrench, additional adjustable wrench, or a vise on the spring seat. To set travel, you will measure the distance from the top of the spring rod to the top of the lock nut. Once you have the travel set with the lock nut, tighten the two parts together snugly, but not so tight that you strip either part. Lightly grease the top out spring, then insert the spring rod assembly into the bottom of the stanchion. Gently press the stanchion plug into the end of the stanchion, making sure not to damage the O-rings. Install the snap ring with your snap ring pliers to hold the spring rod assembly in place. You may need to apply light pressure to the stanchion plug in order to seat the snap ring. Check that the snap ring is seated by rotating it in the interior stanchion groove. Before attempting to install the casting, partially install the Schrader valve assembly or damper screw into the damper rod and fully extend it. Remove either the valve assembly or damper screw once complete. Clean and inspect the wiper seals and foam rings for dirt or damage. Replace if needed. Grease the wiper seals with slick honey or equivalent before installing the casting. With the stanchion assembly inverted, slide the lower casting onto the stanchions until the lower bushings are engaged. Pour approximately 15 cc of fork oil into the screw hole of each leg. Hold the fork at an angle while pouring, or use an angled syringe to avoid getting oil in the ends of the damper and spring rods. Resume sliding the casting onto the stanchions until the casting touches the damper and spring rods. Install the damper screw and ramp control assembly screw and tighten them both to 8 Newton meters. Reinstall the rebound and ramp control knobs on their appropriate sides, red on the damper side and orange on the spring side. Tighten the spring preload cap assembly using your HG spline cassette tool to 5 Newton meters. Reinstall the spring preload dust cover and get ready to shred.